Yeah, hi, I'm Barak Michener. I'm from CoreOS. Right, so CoreOS. Yeah, we're doing a whole bunch of cool things at CoreOS. But one of the most important things, one of the things I love most about CoreOS is that we do pretty much all our development open source in the open. So the title of the talk is Scaling from 0 to 1,000 Open Source Commands. So I wanted to think about this in terms of kind of the stages of a project as I've seen it at CoreOS and as I've seen it personally, and what sorts of things to keep in mind, or because just out of curiosity, how many people actively contribute to open source, like run a project, commit any code to a project? Okay, a couple of hands now. Maintainers, anybody? No? Okay, cool. How many? One or two. Yeah. And how many companies out there roughly do lots of their work in the open? Yeah, I know about. Okay, so this will be kind of maybe a different opinion, or maybe something that hasn't been seen as much, that you don't get to interact with as much, which is cool. So yeah, CoreOS, we have about 100 open source repositories on GitHub. And we maintain most of them anyway. Some of them are libraries, some of them are really cool projects. Some notions of them, sampling, are etcd, Rocket, Final, Dex, which is we just announced last week, which is a cool authorization management. It does some OAuth checking. It's OAuth provider is what it is, internal to what we're doing. Fleet, which is a distributed systemd. Mayday, which is a way you can type Mayday at the command line, and suddenly it'll package up a nice bunch of statistics, log files, everything we need that you can then help us debug CoreOS later. And why are we building all these things? Well, the notion is, of course, to make Google's infrastructure for everybody else. It's sort of our mission statement. And we package this all together into Tectonic, and that's what kind of our product is now. And that's kind of an overview of what CoreOS does. One thing I wanted to also point out is, so we do this all open source, like all those projects open source. 100%, we do this every day. And another project that I'm working on the side is Kaylee, which is my open source graph database I wrote while I was at Google. So I manage a couple projects, I maintain things. This is kind of my life. So I wanted to think about how we go from 0 to 1,000 commits. So at 0 commits, right, on GitHub, you're starting with git init. And this is your blank canvas. This is a good day, right? This is when you start your project, you're excited, you know what it is you want to write, hopefully. At least you have an idea. And with this idea comes a lot of questions right out the gate. And managing these questions, so part of the talk is about, what can we do? How can we have a small team that stays focused, stays agile or rugged, and works toward something greater? Works in the open. So, at first you're going to have like a skeleton file, right? Which is, sorry, I speak too fast when I'm getting started on a talk. So a skeleton file, you may want like a repository with just some basic defaults for your organization, or for whatever projects you might do. Standard choice of licenses, we use Apache 2 at CoreOS. There's a whole bunch of other ones. Standard build files, if you have a tooling set you prefer. Having a README is the kind of a good place to start. I like starting with the README, which says, here's what I think this project is going to be. Very abstract, at least the title. Even if naming is one of the hardest things you can do, and believe me, we've had many naming problems over the years at CoreOS, but there's, so naming, README, and then contributing to IMD is something that people tend to forget. Contributing is a file you write to say, here's how, if you want to contribute to this project, you should go about it. There's a whole bunch that goes into this, and I'll come back to it in a second. One of the notes I wanted to make was that if you don't have a license, you should pick one right now. There's only about there was a good blog post back in March or May, earlier this year, by GitHub saying that only about 20% of their repositories actually have a license. And that's really actually a problem because given the laws, given the situation of the states, international, saying something is in the public domain doesn't count necessarily, or it can. It's all kind of a very messy legal thing. So one of the best things you can do is find yourself a license, find one you agree with. I like BSD for my own stuff, but some people say, I want to share my code better, so GPL. Go for it. I don't care which one, but you pick one because that's the best, because then when other people want to contribute, when other people want to use your software, they know what sort of license it's under. They know what they need to do to do right by you as well. So code style is another thing that people start to rat hole on really fast. And another good sort of tip when you're starting a project is just to pick one. Avoid the bike sharing. You don't want to talk about whether or not your curly braces go on the next line. You want to just pick one. And so Go does a great job here. There's Go format, which tells you which automatically formats your code for you, otherwise it won't compile, which is good. There's PEP8 for Python. There's a whole bunch of other standard guides. Google's got a whole bunch for all their projects. So if you want to just avoid choosing and just say, oh, Google does it this way, here we go, that's a perfectly reasonable thing. But by having a code style and then mentioning it and contributing .md, because all your code should look roughly the same. If you're reviewing it, this is the standard by which I'm holding my code and how it will look. So putting this all together means adding contributing. Okay, so then you start coding, right? We start committing some code, 200 commits in. None of this is exact, right? I'm using this by proxy as more of a story than an exact number of, oh man, at 200 commits, it must look this way. But in the first 200 some odd commits, right, the commits messages may be very messy, like I did some work, things are in progress, who knows. And we don't do this in general, right? But maybe the right thing would be to, at about this point is when you are thinking about releasing the project. This is that point where you've done some work, you've got some ideas in code, they're functional, and maybe we want to start releasing it. This could be on the order of days, right? This is not too far into the project that it hasn't happened yet. And you can iterate super fast. You've got your small team, you've got 3 people who are saying, hey, what if we try building a, actually, that's a good example. Just the other week, there was Matt in New York, Matt Gibson. He was writing CRUD, and something we open sourced about, and he did it in 2 or 3 days. All it was taking webhooks and then deploying it on Kubernetes. So if I got a new container built, I have a hook for that, boom, I'm going to then redeploy it based on a configuration file. And so it's kind of end-to-end continuous delivery, right? So he started writing it and just got a couple commits in. And so he was about this stage about a week ago with it. So what if it doesn't work out? And I wanted to call that, there are projects that you create, there are ideas you come up with, you type Git in it, and you have that idea, but maybe your experiment didn't work the way you planned. Maybe business needs changed, maybe anything changed. That's okay. I want to suggest that if you're writing code and you're creating something that just doesn't work, that's fine. We don't say that enough, actually. We should think that every project should be good, every project should live, but really, if you've learned something in the experimental phase, and you'll have experimental phases throughout your project, but you should be able to feel good about failing at it. You should feel good about rebasing your entire tree down to get rid of those nasty commit messages into something that you're about ready to announce. So yeah, preparing to announce. You want to create a mailing list, maybe, if this is a big project you're planning on selling or working with or supporting, IRC channels. And then there are 2 other things about preparing for announcement that I wanted to suggest or point out. One is that the last couple commits may involve a lot of what I call time to first hello world, which is you have a lot of, at first you're the first person writing, you know exactly what your code is doing. But somebody else reading it may or may not understand exactly what you're trying to do. So if you want your project to actually be successful and people to get interested in it, a great way to do that is to minimize the time to first hello world. right? That you should be able to download your thing, run it, and within a couple of minutes at most, right, have something that happened, something meaningful happening, right? For my graph, it was download it, run it. I have a REPL. Now I can do my first graph query just straight from the README. And hey, I have some results. I have some movies that this actor starred in. That works. That's really nice. Oh, hey, you can do cool things with this. So encouraging people to get interested in your project at all is sort of minimizing the time to first hello world. This was a slide from my friend Julia. I really liked it, so I stole it. Another thing that we've started doing at CoreOS that I really appreciate is the notion of having a roadmap.md file. Some people have roadmap directories, but usually a simple markdown file will suffice, which is here's what we're releasing today, here's what features it has. Here are the next big features and the next point releases that we're going to be talking about for the next month or something. Next month or two, maybe not too far out. It's not 2 years planning. It's not, because things change way too fast for 2 years of planning. But within the next 2 months, this is kind of what we're going to be working on. And pull requests should be accepted for this. This is something that, your team, maybe your CoreOS, and we've got etcd, and we've got plans that and milestones and OKRs, but really that shouldn't limit people from contributing, right? They should want to say, hey, what if we added in this feature? I'm willing to do it. You put your name right next to it, put it in the roadmap.md, and you should be able to encourage outside contributors to want to grow your roadmap. Because you can drive it, you can direct it yourself, but really it's kind of a collaborative effort that talks about where we're going in the next little while. So all of our major projects have a roadmap.md file now, and that's something I really appreciate. And then you announce, yay, put it on Hacker News, call it done. Or not done, but call it started. And the sooner you're working in the public, the better. Because then you're beholden to other eyes seeing your code. Because we do everything in the open at CoreOS, I actually feel like my code gets better because I know that my pull requests are in the open. If they want to look at my personal fork, they can, and see all my work in progress branches and so on that I've sent up to GitHub just so I can work on it on different machines. But every time my commit messages get better, right? I'm actually doing something meaningful in this branch, and I'm trying to collapse it. And of course, it'll collapse it down, or I'll rebase before I merge or something. But really, because I'm working in the open, and because we work all our code in the open mostly at CoreOS, it's a better experience, I think, for doing projects like that. Right, so okay, moving forward, we're at about 400 commits. So the past 200 commits now are looking a little bit more reasonable, right? They are, you have real commit messages, you're doing pull requests, you're doing code reviews. I hope everyone's doing code reviews in general? Yeah, mostly at your companies? Good, because I actually started right out of school thinking, code review, why would we want to do that? But really, it's that same effect of doing everything in the open, but 10 times more important. Because A, somebody else is seeing it. B, if you get hit by a bus, somebody else will have at least looked at it. It's not the best thing in the world, but at least somebody else will say, oh, I know that piece of code they wrote some time ago. And that's better than nothing. But it's still early in the project's life cycle, right? Things can still change. Don't be afraid to kind of do some major refactors or experiment and break things, because you're not quite at, you're not even at 0.5 yet. You're still in the sort of alpha phase of figuring out what's going on. But because you're working in the open, everybody gets to see this process. So it's a little more scary, but out there. You also start getting your first external contributors. This happened to me. Dan Kortchak from Australia, awesome guy. Here's my first contributor. Sorry, wrong slide. That slide. Here's my first contributor for Kaylee, and I couldn't work half as well without him, because anyone from the outside community who wants to help you is immediately your best friend. They understand, because they get it right from the outset. You haven't had to sell them on it. They already knew they kind of wanted it. So, and hopefully they know what they want to change. So You start by just treating them as best you can. Try and merging their code as fast as you can. I know I've failed at that sometimes. And another thing I'd heard actually at the conference, it got added to the slide late in the game, is that if you have to answer a question 3 times from anybody external or anybody who's looking at your project, then you should probably write down the answer and start your wiki, start your FAQ. Because if people ask me, what does a label mean in a triple, I should be able to say that, right? Point them somewhere and say, hey, that's good. Another optional thing you can do is start adding benchmarks. This is something I didn't think about as being oh man, benchmarks, I'm not ready to benchmark, right? I'm still alpha, I don't know how fast my database is going to be it etcd, be it Kaylee. And turns out it doesn't have to be perfect. You should be able to write a benchmark. Go is really good at this because benchmarks are part of tests. And having a measurement makes, I think it was said earlier in one of the talks, if you can measure anything, it's a really good argument, right? You should be measuring everything and have as much telemetry as you can. So the better measurements, more measurements you have, the better. Makes decisions easier. For instance, here's a current measurement from Kaylee where it's a benchmark I ran. I rewrote some of the internals. I changed from using JSON encoded blobs within the store to using protobuf, which really sped things up, right? So now I can do queries about 30 times faster, 30% faster, 15% faster in some cases. Big win. But the downside is it does require sort of a database migration. So what's the trade-off? But at least I can know what sort of the win is. And these are just queries I decided, this seems about right. One of them is really simple. It's like, just get me one thing. Give me a key, value, done. How fast does that happen? And so that was really useful, and it's been really useful to track the progress then of my code, is to say, hey, here's what it used to be. Now it's faster, now it's slower. Maybe we take a small speed hit, but we get these advantages. That's a really great way of discussing a pull request. So then we move on to moving forward, 600 commits. So now we're getting out there, right? We have a couple early releases. Now we're doing 0.3, 0.4 in etcd land. That definitely happened. We're using semantic versioning. I wanted to call out because we do everything as much as we can at CoreOS doing semantic versioning, which is to say, major breaking releases, minor releases, and point releases that shouldn't change anything other than fix bugs, mostly. That's less true when you're less, sub 1.0 because things are subject to change in that time frame. Once you call something 1.0, it should be major releases, break things, but otherwise API compatible backwards and forwards, unless you have other tooling that might roll your database forward automatically. You can do automatic migrations and still, but as long as it doesn't break anything for external users or for external API clients, other programs that might be talking to it. That's a good idea. But because you've put out some early releases and some binaries, one thing that will happen is this. If you give a mouse a binary, he's going to put it into production. And, and it's because once you give it away, somebody's going to start using it. Doesn't matter, always happens. And so, but this is actually really a good thing. This means that people have noticed. It means they're trying out your code. They believe in it. They want to run it right now. It finds bugs really fast because they're trying it in production. But this is actually this is where it starts to be a question of how does a small team deal with this? Because suddenly we have users to support. Oh, wow. So I wanted to shout out something that we don't should do better in both all my projects, actually, is to write the fine manual. Yeah, you're the person who knows the most about it. You should write down what you know. You should actually start to structure real documentation. I know it usually is messy because we usually want to start writing the next great feature, but taking the time to make something usable, and the UX as well is what I mentioned on here, because maybe your command line flags are getting really unwieldy, or maybe you need to think about what your client's, your API design looks like. But writing the manual will help you, A, understand where people are coming from, and B, give you a better, give everyone else who's trying to use it in production or trying to support it, trying to write clients, a better understanding of what your guarantees and what your API is based on. And when you can actually close a bug, and one thing we try and strive for at GoTo is closing more bugs with saying, oh, hey, thank you for asking that question. Here's a pull request with a documentation change so that in the future when somebody asks this question, because it will happen in the future again, we can say, point at it and say, hey, we have an answer for that. So then, okay, let me take a short. 800 commits. Right. So what do the past 200 commits look like? Now we're prepping for 1.0. We're stabilizing our APIs. Hopefully we have no major changes in our APIs. You can do major refactors, which are tricky but possible. And I wanted to call out a story here, which was etcd and the migration from 0.46 to 2.0. Now, I don't know if you all have run etcd at all, but it's a distributed key value store that runs through the Raft consensus protocol, so that as long as you have a quorum of machines, nodes in the cluster, you can guarantee that your data is the same and the history is the same. This talk is less about etcd than about open source, but because it goes through Raft, each of these nodes has to communicate with each other in a very specific way. And we decided that the Raft implementation we had been using was not up to snuff. It was not sufficient for, it would break at times and in interesting ways, so we wanted to do a complete rewrite of that. Our APIs were going to stay the same. Our external clients would hopefully not notice. But internally, these nodes would change completely, and especially in talking to each other. So this is where we had to kind of make the bad but reasonable decision to actually say, okay, people are using 0.46 in production, but here's this new version that won't talk to it, and it's going to be a hard migration. You're going to have to actually bring it down, move the stuff over, and bring it up again, or do two at the same time, or something like that. Yeah, that kind of sucks, but the benefits are that, hey, we have this brand new Raft that's going to make everything so much better and stable in the future that you go through pain once now while you're still having pain, and hopefully you won't have pain in the future. So one of the problems with doing things in the open like this is that you have this situation where, hey, I have this alpha version in production, and now we want to go and change that again. So that's also why we called it a breaking change, but also because we knew the Raft was stable and we'd been working on it for months, we knew that we would also want to call it a first major release, a first major version. So that's kind of the story there. And then moving forward, you're at about 1,000 commits now. So where do you go after that, right? You start talking about release cadences. This is something we've started on etcd, which is releasing every 2 weeks, 1 week. It depends, but you should always release on a Wednesday or something like that, and have point releases, bug fixes, whatever happened to be rolled in the past week. Just package it up, add it, increment your revision number, and call it another version. Really useful. One thing we've also done is started talking about stable and master branches. Master branches where all the new stuff is happening, new Raft speedups, new internal, new protocols, new APIs, things that we want to have in the next major version are on master, but because people are actually running stable in production, we have stable, and we have bug fixes that get cherry picked over. It's some people talk about Git flow, some people talk about their own Git things. We just kind of keep it simple with 2 branches, stable and master, and release these, either one of them, as part of a release cadence, right? If we have bug fixes that have hit stable, then maybe we do a release of that on Wednesday, and if we have a new alpha thing we're trying out, we'll release that on the next Wednesday. You can sort of go between. And then after that, sort of, you built a project, you're running it, people are running it. Now you have to find a way to make profit, but that's that's not the goal of open source. The goal of open source is actually to build something awesome and to give it out to the community so that they can build awesome things, and it's a virtuous cycle. So yeah, that's most of my talk. I think I've taken about half an hour. Yeah, so I'm a little bit early, but I'll take questions because questions are my favorite part. So
What's the best way to get visibility for your open source projects?
Good ways to get, oh, sorry. Sorry. Good ways to get visibility. Obviously posting, what's funny is, that's a great question because it feels really weird to try and get visibility because the thing you have to do is just start announcing everywhere. You don't want to be a spammer, but you kind of want to spam. You want to say, hey, I'm doing this thing, and you want to say that where it makes sense in context. Don't tell them if they're not asking, but just saying, hey, I'm doing this, or I'm building this, or hey, I just did this new major release here, or hey, I have this new feature. Oh, you're talking about Raft. Hey, well, we just added this to etcd. Hey, we should be doing more stuff over there. Or, oh, you're talking about graphs. Hey, well, have you checked out my Kaylee project? There's a bunch of opportunities that show up that it might seem slightly improper to say, hey, yeah, I'm doing this project, but really go for it. Because also, it's open source, right? You want people to be interested in it. You want to grow a community. And it's free anyway. So the worst that they're going to say is, oh, no, I have a new free project I know about. So, yeah.
So you touched on something interesting earlier. You were talking about you've got personal open source projects, but also you work on open source projects at work.
Yeah.
What differences do you see between them? Obviously, one of them is your own personal time.
Yeah.
One is like, to a degree, you're being told what to do and paid for.
Yeah, in that sense, it's actually been very interesting. I've been learning how to balance this a lot better this past year since working at CoreOS. Because stuff that you're told to do is obviously less fun than stuff you want to do. But hopefully you try and make one into the other. And so when it comes to more work projects like etcd, then I think the thing that I notice more is that I will do the documentation writing or API specs and so on more for work, just whereas I feel like I can do more fun projects or more fun features, just kind of, oh, I have this idea for something I want to write, let's write it, and I can do that on my side project if I have the time. If I don't, but most of the time I'm doing things like, okay, here's our plan, here's our roadmap, which is probably the better way to do it. I'm going to start adding a roadmap and start adding some more of this, what is mostly project management, actually, to my side project as I've been learning the things that sort of work in the open source sphere from etcd. But so it's just time management, trying to find things that you're interested in your day job, and still having some energy left at the end of the day if you want to work on your side project. But since it's all in the open, it's fun because the two can influence each other, right? You can have a great idea and commit it to one code, and you're like, oh, I can just use that over here too because it's all open source. And so a good example of that, has that happened? Oh, a good example of that is kind of within my office. I have a coworker, Jimmy Zielinski, who's written one of the better BitTorrent trackers, the one that's used within Facebook to distribute applications in its data centers. And a lot of kind of it's in Go as well. And so kind of on lunch breaks and so on, we'll talk about how our projects are going. And some of the changes he's made have influenced my project and vice versa. And so working in open source is great because it also gets other open source people involved at your companies. I don't know. I've gone a bit of a tangent now, but yeah. I'll repeat the question, which is how do you pick a license such that companies can use it and people can build on it while at the same time being reasonable for your own purposes. Let me start by saying I'm not a lawyer, just so I can disclaimer, everyone knows it. Here we go. Okay, now that that's out of the way, I think the one that seems to be, and in my opinion, the one people tend to choose is Apache 2, just because it's got some reasonable things around how patents work and how anything we come up with may or may not be patentable, but whatever, we still kind of own that because reasons in the US and other systems. But it's still basically at its core pretty close to BSD. You can use it within your projects. You can build it into a proprietary thing. You can compile against, you can link against it, which is all pretty good. Obviously, BSD, MIT, that's what I do in for fun projects or small side projects of mine, just because, well, I mean, I went to Berkeley, so BSD is awesome, and furthermore, it's just enough to say, don't blame me if it blows up your data center, but otherwise, here you go, do whatever you want with it. And it's pretty well tested and pretty well known, and people have written a lot of code and done a lot of legwork already around BSD and MIT, so that those are also pretty well used within companies as well, because again, it's just free. I can do whatever I want with it. Things that tend to be a bit more tricky tend to be, some people will use GPL if they're comfortable with sharing their changes back. Some larger enterprises less comfortable with doing that for whatever reason. They really shouldn't be. And then there's even crazier licensing structures that are less familiar to me, so I'm not going to comment on them. But I'd say, short answer is people seem to pick Apache 2 to get this, or maybe there's also the Mozilla one, right? Which is you can share your change. That's per file. If you want to use that, you can share changes back, I think, but it doesn't have to be all of it. You can just keep your own sub-library and still be fine. So there's lots of options. That's what choosealicense.com is all about. And yeah, picking one is better than not, because otherwise you're in the whole legal limbo of what's actually. Yeah, well, thank you, everyone. It's about that time, actually.